The sprinkler valve was choked with grit, and the water was pooling in a muddy soup around the base of a $300 Japanese maple. I knelt in the dirt, my knees soaking through my work pants, and jammed a flathead screwdriver into the housing to clear the debris. It was 90 degrees in the shade, and the Salt Lake City air had that dry, baking quality that turns skin to parchment in an hour. I could see the Wasatch Mountains shimmering in the distance, but my focus was on the leak. "Hand me the pliers, Mike," I said without looking up. Mike, a 20-year-old who spent more time checking his phone than checking the grade of a slope, shuffled over and dropped the tool into the mud. I picked it up, wiped it on my thigh, and tightened the fitting until it clicked. I don't like waste, and I don't like sloppy work. As a landscape foreman, my job is to make sure the vision on the blueprint actually survives the Utah soil. If a valve leaks, the plant dies. If the plant dies, the client calls me screaming. I prefer to kill the problem before it starts. By the time I climbed into my truck, my lower back was humming with a dull ache. I drove home through the suburbs, passing the same rows of beige houses and manicured lawns that looked like they'd been cut with a ruler. We live in a duplex with a shared side yard, a place that's usually quiet, except for the sound of the neighbor's dog barking at the mailman. I walked through the front door and dropped my tool belt on the entryway bench with a heavy thud. The house smelled like toasted garlic and old upholstery. Gregory was in the living room, leaning back in his recliner with a project folder open on his lap. He's a construction project coordinator, which means he spends his day managing people who actually move the dirt, much like I do, though he does it from a climate-controlled office. "Hey, Jan," he said, not looking up from his papers. "Brandon's in the kitchen. He's home for a few days between shifts at the restaurant." I nodded and headed toward the kitchen. Brandon is 25 and manages a high-volume bistro downtown. He's Gregory's son from his first marriage. I've been Greg's wife for 12 years, and for 10 of those, I've been the one making sure the household actually functions. I'm his stepmother, and while I've handled the daily care, the grocery runs, the coordination of his visits, the cleaning of the guest room, I've always known there was a line I couldn't cross. I'm the one who keeps the gears turning, but I'm not the one who owns the machine. Brandon was leaning against the counter, scrolling through his phone and eating grapes straight from the bag. He didn't look up when I walked in. "You're late," he said. His voice had that flat, bored quality he'd perfected since he hit 20. "I had a valve blow at the Miller site," I replied, moving past him to the sink to wash the grit off my hands. "Did you move your laundry out of the dryer? I need to get a load of towels started." Brandon didn't move. He just popped another grape into his mouth. "I'll get to it. I need the dryer now, Brandon. I've got 3 loads of work clothes to get through before tomorrow morning." He finally looked at me, his expression blank. "It's not a big deal, Janet. Just wait an hour." I stopped scrubbing and looked at him. I'm not a patient woman when it comes to basic efficiency. I'm not asking for a favor. I'm asking you to move your clothes so I can do my job. It takes 10 seconds. Brandon shrugged, a slow, deliberate movement of his shoulders. "I don't really see why I have to jump just because you're in a rush." "Because we live in a shared house, and I'm the one who does the laundry," I said. "It's common courtesy." He let out a short, dry laugh and stepped back from the counter, crossing his arms. "See, that's the thing. You keep talking like you're the one running the show here." I frowned. "I am the one running the show. I handle the bills, the cleaning, and the schedule. Greg doesn't even know where the vacuum is." Brandon leaned in a little, his voice dropping into something colder. "Dad told me that you're the one who handles the chores, but you aren't the one who makes the rules. He said the real family decisions, the things that actually matter, stay between him and me. You're just the one who keeps the house running, Janet. You don't actually count as part of the inner circle." The silence that followed was heavy. I felt a sudden sharp heat in my chest that had nothing to do with the Utah sun. I stared at him, trying to process the words. He hadn't just been rude. He had been reciting a script. He wasn't guessing about the hierarchy of this house. He had been briefed on it. "What did you just say?" I asked, my voice low. Brandon didn't look intimidated. He looked satisfied, like he'd finally played a card that he knew would win the hand. I'm just repeating what Dad said. Why get worked up? He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving the bag of grapes on the counter and his damp clothes in the dryer. I stood there for a long minute, the smell of garlic and damp laundry filling the room. I looked toward the living room, where Gregory was still sitting in his recliner, probably thinking about a project timeline or a zoning permit, completely unaware, or perhaps perfectly aware, that he had just handed his son a weapon to use against me. I didn't go to Gregory right then. I went to the laundry room, ripped Brandon's wet clothes out of the dryer, and dumped them in a heap on the floor. I didn't feel good about it, but I felt the need to do something that matched the sudden, jagged edge of the conversation. I started my towels, the machine humming a steady, vibrating rhythm that drowned out the sound of my own breathing. The heap of wet clothes stayed on the laundry room floor for 2 days. Every time Brandon walked past them to get to the kitchen, he looked at the pile and then looked at me, his expression a mix of amusement and disdain. He didn't move them, and I didn't offer to help. Gregory stayed out of it, retreating into his project folders and the quiet sanctuary of his recliner. He acted as if the air in the house wasn't vibrating, with a tension that made my teeth ache. I spent the next few days focusing on my cruise. I poured my frustration into a retaining wall project in Draper, obsessing over the level of every stone. I liked the honesty of masonry. If a stone didn't fit, you chipped it until it did. You didn't pretend it was a perfect fit while telling the neighbor it was a different story entirely. On Friday, I remembered the appointment. Brandon had been dealing with a chronic meniscus tear in his left knee, the result of 10-hour shifts on hard restaurant floors. For the last 6 months, I'd been the one managing the logistics. I'd handled the insurance authorizations, tracked the referral to the orthopedic specialist, and kept the dates on the family calendar. Gregory had told me, "John, you're so much better at the scheduling than I am. Just take care of Brandon's knee stuff." The follow-up was set for Tuesday at 10 a.m. "You're all set for the specialist on Tuesday," I told Brandon during dinner. I didn't look up from my plate of roast chicken. I've already confirmed the copay is covered under the primary. Brandon didn't stop chewing. "I'm not going." I paused, my fork halfway to my mouth. "What do you mean you're not going?" "This is the appointment we've been waiting 3 weeks for. If you cancel now, you'll be pushed back to next month." "I've got a double shift Tuesday," Brandon said, "and I don't think I need the surgery the guy was talking about. I'll just ice it." I looked at Gregory. He was chewing slowly, staring at the center of the table. "He's a grown man, Jan. If he feels he can manage the pain, we don't need to force the issue." "Force the issue?" I put my fork down. The sound of the metal hitting the ceramic felt like a gunshot. I spent 4 hours on the phone with the insurance company to get this approved. I'm the one who coordinated the referral. "You told me to handle it, Greg." Gregory finally looked up, his voice sounding tired. "I did. And you did a great job. But Brandon and I talked about it this morning. We decided he'll just handle it on his own time. He doesn't want to be pushed into a procedure he's not sure about." The heat returned to my chest. It wasn't just the canceled appointment. It was the private conversation that had happened in the margins of my life regarding a task I had been assigned to manage. I was the project manager for a job I wasn't allowed to supervise. "You can't just decide that after I've done the legwork," I said. "It's his knee, Janet," Brandon added, his voice flat. "You're just the one who makes the phone calls. You don't actually have a say in whether I get cut open or not." I left the table. I didn't go to the bedroom. I went straight to the kitchen and grabbed my phone. I was shaking, a fine tremor in my fingers that made it hard to swipe the screen. I called the orthopedic clinic immediately. I didn't call Gregory, and I didn't try to reason with Brandon. I wanted to fix the error in the system. When the office coordinator, a woman named Sarah who had been helpful during the referral process, answered, I didn't start with a greeting. "Sarah, I need to know who has been talking to my stepson," I snapped. "Did Brandon call you? Did Gregory call you to change the parameters of the treatment? Because if you're taking directions from them to bypass the person who actually manages the insurance and the scheduling, we have a serious problem." There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear the muffled sound of other phones ringing in the background. "I'm sorry?" Sarah asked, her voice cautious. "Mrs. Joyce, I'm not sure what you're referring to. We haven't spoken to Brandon or Mr. Joyce since the appointment was confirmed." "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice rising. "Something has changed. Brandon is refusing to come in, and he's acting like the plan has been altered. If you've been giving him medical advice or changing his chart without notifying me, I want to know right now." "Ma'am, I'm just the coordinator," Sarah replied, and I could hear the professional patience beginning to fray. "I don't give medical advice, and nothing has changed on our end. Your stepson is an adult. If he chooses not to show up, that's between him and the doctor. I don't know why you're yelling at me." I froze. The silence on the line felt cold. I realized I had just spent 2 minutes berating a woman who had done absolutely nothing wrong. She wasn't part of the inner circle conspiracy. She was just a person at a desk in a clinic, trying to do her job. I had assumed she was the leak, the one facilitating the bypass, simply because she was the first person available who was connected to this situation. I apologize," I muttered, though the apology felt thin. "I'm having a stressful morning. I'll call back to cancel the slot." I hung up and leaned against the kitchen counter. I felt a wave of shame, but it was quickly eclipsed by a sharper realization. The problem wasn't at the clinic. The problem was in my own living room. I had acted on an impulse attacking a stranger because I couldn't figure out how to handle the man in the recliner. I walked back into the living room. Gregory was still there, the project folder open, looking for all the world like a man who had no idea he was dismantling his marriage one private conversation at a time. "I canceled the appointment," I said. "Thanks, Jan," he replied, not looking up. "I appreciate you taking care of that." He thanked me for the labor, just as he always did, while he continued to strip away my authority. I stood there in the quiet of the duplex, realizing that being the one who keeps the gears turning meant nothing if the person owning the machine wanted me to be invisible. The silence in the house lasted until Monday. I tried to ignore the feeling of being a ghost in my own kitchen, but the resentment sat in my stomach like a stone. I spent my mornings at the Draper site, directing a crew to haul away tons of limestone, and my evenings pretending that the tension between Brandon and me was just a phase. On Tuesday morning, I realized I needed the referral notes from the orthopedic clinic. Gregory had suddenly decided that maybe a different specialist in Provo would be a better fit for Brandon's knee, and he asked me to get the paperwork transferred. He didn't offer to call. He just mentioned it while he was pouring his coffee, as if he were asking me to pick up more milk. I dialed Sarah at the clinic. I expected a cold shoulder, but I hoped for professional neutrality. "This is Janet Joyce," I said. "I'm calling about Brandon Joyce. We'd like to transfer his records to a clinic in Provo. Could you email the referral notes and the last imaging report?" There was a pause. I could hear the rhythmic clicking of a keyboard. When Sarah spoke, her voice was flat, stripped of the helpful tone she'd used during the first few weeks of scheduling. "I can't do that over the phone, Mrs. Joyce," Sarah said. "Our policy requires a signed release form from the patient. You'll need to download the PDF from our portal, have Brandon sign it, and upload it back to the system. Once that's processed, we'll send the files within 5 to 7 business days." "I've handled the paperwork for him for months," I replied. "Can't you just send them since I'm the primary contact on the insurance?" "The patient is an adult," Sarah said. "And given our last conversation, I'm going to stick strictly to the protocol. I'll be happy to help once the formal request is in the system." The line went dead. I stared at the phone. Before my outburst, Sarah had been the kind of office coordinator who would squeeze in a last-minute appointment or send a quick email to save me a trip. Now, she was a wall of bureaucracy. I had traded a helpful ally for a rulebook because I'd used her as a punching bag for my husband's failures. I felt a hot prickle of shame, but I didn't call back to apologize again. I just downloaded the form. That evening, I put the paper in front of Brandon. He was scrolling through his phone, a plate of takeout Thai food in front of him. "Sign this," I said. "Your dad wants the records sent to Provo." Brandon didn't even look at the paper. "I told Dad I don't want to go to Provo. It's a 40-minute drive." "Your dad is the one who wants the transfer," I said. Just sign the paper so we can move forward. He looked at me, then at the paper, and pushed it back toward me with one finger. I'll sign it when I feel like it. Stop hovering, Janet. I felt the familiar surge of impatience. I didn't argue. I just walked into the living room, where Gregory was reading a trade journal. Brandon won't sign the release for the Provo clinic, I told him. You told me to handle the transfer. Tell him to sign the paper. Gregory sighed and lowered the journal. He looked at me with a look of mild exhaustion, as if I were the one causing the problem. John, why are you making such a production out of this? He's probably just tired from his shift. Just leave it on the counter. He'll get to it. I'm not making a production, I said, my voice tightening. You assigned me the task. I'm trying to complete it. He's refusing to cooperate, and now the clinic is making me jump through hoops, because I had to deal with the fallout of the last canceled appointment. I'm doing the work you asked for. Gregory stood up, his expression shifting from tired to irritated. This is exactly what I mean. You treat this house like a job site. You're always barking orders and pushing for a deadline. Brandon is my son, not one of your landscape crews. You're creating a hostile environment by trying to force him into a schedule he doesn't agree with. I stepped back, stunned. A hostile environment? I'm the one who's been ignored for a week. I'm the one who does the laundry, the scheduling, and the insurance calls. You told me specifically to handle the records. Now that I'm actually doing it, I'm the one barking orders? You're overstepping, Gregory said. I asked for your help, but that doesn't give you the right to harass him. If he doesn't want to sign the paper right this second, let it go. You're too rigid. Janet, you don't know how to just let things happen. I looked at him, really looked at him. He wanted the benefit of my efficiency without the cost of me actually exercising the authority required to be efficient. He wanted me to be the invisible hand that fixed everything. But the moment that hand became visible to Brandon, Gregory cast me as the villain. He had given me a job, then criticized me for doing it, all to maintain his image as the cool father in the inner circle. I walked back into the kitchen. Brandon was still eating, completely unbothered. He caught my eye and gave me a small, smug smile. He knew exactly where he stood. He knew that as long as he played the role of the reluctant son, Gregory would shield him and paint me as the nag. I didn't pick up the paper from the counter. I didn't ask Brandon again. I didn't even tell Gregory that the Provo clinic would likely cancel the provisional slot if the records didn't arrive by Friday. I went to the bedroom and closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed and thought about Sarah at the clinic, the way she had shut me down with a cold, professional precision. For the first time, I knew why she had done it. She had been tired of being the one who handled the mess for people who didn't respect her. Friday afternoon arrived with a wind that whipped the dry dust across the shared side yard, rattling the fence panels. I spent the day at the Draper site, overseeing the final grade on a hillside. I didn't think about the Provo clinic. I didn't think about the signed release form still sitting on the kitchen counter, gathering a thin layer of dust next to the fruit bowl. I just focused on the slope of the land and the way the soil settled. When I walked through the front door at 5, Gregory was already in the living room. He had his laptop open and a look of concentrated confusion on his face. The Provo clinic called, he said, looking up as I dropped my keys. They said they never received the records from the first place. They've given the slot to someone else. They told me if we want to get back on the schedule, we have to start the referral process over from the beginning. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I didn't look at him. That's a shame. Gregory stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood. What do you mean? That's a shame. Jan, I told you to handle the transfer. Why didn't you make sure it happened? I thought you had it under control. The paper is on the counter, Greg, I said, my voice flat. It's been there since Tuesday. I asked Brandon to sign it. He told me he wouldn't. Gregory blinked, his expression shifting from confusion to irritation. Well, why didn't you just tell me he was refusing? You could have come to me, and I would have told him to sign it. You just let the appointment slip away. I did tell you, I replied, finally turning to face him. I told you on Tuesday evening. You told me I was making a production out of it. You told me I was too rigid and that I was creating a hostile environment by barking orders at your son. Brandon walked into the room then, wearing a clean shirt and smelling like the restaurant's fryer. He stopped near the counter, glancing at the unsigned form. He didn't look guilty. He looked bored. I told her I didn't want to go to Provo, Brandon said. It's a waste of time. It's not a waste of time. It's your knee. Gregory snapped, though the edge in his voice was softer for Brandon than it was for me. Why didn't you just sign the damn paper, Brandon? Brandon shrugged. I didn't think it was a big deal. Janet usually just handles it. Besides, you said she doesn't make the rules. I figured if it was actually important, you'd be the one asking me. The room went quiet. The air felt thick like the humidity before a summer storm. Gregory looked at Brandon, then at me, and then back at the paper on the counter. The double game had finally collapsed. He couldn't blame me for the failure without acknowledging that he had stripped me of the tools to succeed. He had spent months telling Brandon that my labor was just chores and that my authority was non-existent, all while expecting me to produce the results of a manager. You told him I don't count, I said. It wasn't a question. Gregory rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my eyes. I didn't put it that way, Jan. I wanted him to feel like he had a direct line to me. I didn't want him feeling managed by a stepmother. You didn't want him feeling managed. So you managed me into a corner, I said. You asked for the work, but you told the person I was working with that I didn't have the right to ask for his cooperation. You can't have it both ways, Greg. You can't use me as a secretary and then call me a tyrant when I try to get the secretary work done. Brandon leaned against the wall, watching us. Look, if you guys are going to fight about who's in charge of my knee, I'm just going to go to the gym and ice it. I don't really care about the Provo place anyway. You do care when you can't walk through a double shift without limping, I said. I looked at Gregory. He looked small in his living room, caught between the son he wanted to impress and the wife who actually kept his life from falling apart. I made a mistake too, I said, the words feeling heavy in my throat. I called the clinic on Tuesday. I yelled at Sarah, the coordinator. I accused her of bypassing me and lying to me because I was so angry at the two of you that I looked for someone else to hit. I was wrong to do that. Being angry didn't make my first accusation accurate, and it didn't fix the problem. It just made me the villain in her eyes. Gregory looked surprised that I was admitting a fault. I didn't know you called her. Because you weren't paying attention to the process. Only the result, I said. I walked over to the counter, picked up the release form, and ripped it in half. I didn't do it in a rage. I did it with the same precision I used to prune a hedge. I dropped the pieces into the trash can. I'm done, I said. I'm not handling your insurance. I'm not tracking your referrals. I'm not managing the family calendar for anyone but myself. If Brandon wants his knee fixed, he can call the clinic, download the forms, and drive himself to Provo. John, you can't be serious, Gregory said. You're the only one who knows how the portal works. You have the logins. They're in the blue folder in the office, I replied. Print them out. Figure it out. You're just being spiteful, Brandon muttered. No, I said, looking him in the eye. I'm just following the rules you and your father established. I'm the one who handles the chores, but I'm not the one who makes the rules. Since I don't count as part of the inner circle, I've decided to stop volunteering for the inner circle's errands. I walked past them and went into the bedroom, closing the door. I didn't feel a rush of victory. I felt a profound exhaustion. I had spent 12 years trying to fit into a space that Gregory had designed to be just small enough that I would always be useful but never powerful. Gregory knocked on the door an hour later. He didn't come in, he just stood in the hallway. I don't want us to be like this, he said. I know I messed up. I thought I was keeping the peace, but I was just pushing all the friction onto you. The peace was a lie, Greg, I said through the wood. It was just quiet because I was the only one doing the work to keep it that way. I want to fix it, he said. Not just the knee stuff, all of it. I looked up a couple of people, a counselor who works with blended families. Maybe we could all go together. I stayed silent for a long time. I knew that a few sessions wouldn't suddenly make Brandon respect me, or make Gregory. The autumn wind had started to pull the gold out of the cottonwoods, scattering leaves across the shared side yard in frantic, swirling heaps. I spent my Saturday morning with a leaf blower, clearing the concrete path and pushing the debris toward the curb. The air was crisp, the kind of Salt Lake City morning where the mountains look sharp enough to cut, and the smell of wood smoke drifted from a few houses down. I was halfway through the yard when Gregory stepped onto the porch. He was holding his phone and wearing a look of mild panic. "John, I can't find the confirmation email for my cardiologist appointment on Monday," he said, stepping down the stairs. "I think it went to my junk folder. Or maybe you archived it. Can you just jump on a computer and check the date and time for me?" I stopped the blower. The sudden silence felt heavy. A few months ago, I would have dropped everything, walked inside, logged into his email, found the message, and probably added a reminder to his phone and a note on the kitchen calendar. I would have done it without a second thought because that was how the house functioned. "The passwords are in the blue folder in the office," I said, my voice steady. Gregory blinked. He stayed where he was, one foot on the grass, one on the concrete. "I know where the folder is, but it'll take me 10 minutes to boot up the desktop and hunt through the archives." "You're already right here. It'll take you 2 minutes. It takes you 10 minutes to do it yourself," I replied. "I'm not managing your medical calendar anymore, Greg. You've got the tools. Use them." He sighed, a long theatrical sound of frustration. "I'm just asking for a tiny bit of help. Why does everything have to be a battle of wills now?" "It's not a battle," I said, restarting the blower. The roar of the engine drowned out whatever he said next. I didn't look at him. I just focused on the leaves, blowing them in a clean, straight line toward the street. He eventually turned and walked back inside. I knew he was annoyed, and I knew he probably spent the next 10 minutes grumbling to himself while he navigated his inbox. But for the first time in 12 years, the discomfort of his confusion wasn't my problem to solve. I didn't feel a surge of joy, just a quiet, humming sense of relief. The burden of being the only adult in the room had finally shifted, even if only by a few inches. The transition wasn't seamless. Brandon still treated me with a cool, distant politeness that felt like a thin sheet of ice. He stopped calling me Janet in that condescending tone and started using my name only when necessary. But the warmth wasn't there. He had spent years believing he was part of a secret club with his father, and realizing that the club was built on my unpaid labor hadn't made him like me. It had just made him realize the cost of his own comfort. We started seeing a counselor in October. It was a small office near the university, with beige walls and a white noise machine that hummed in the corner to keep the conversations private. The sessions were structured. The therapist, a woman named Dr. Eris, didn't let us spiral into old arguments. She forced us to speak in I statements and kept to strict clock. The first few sessions were excruciating. Brandon sat in the oversized armchair, leaning back with his arms crossed, staring at the ceiling. Gregory spent most of the time trying to smooth things over, apologizing in a way that felt like he was trying to negotiate a contract rather than express regret. "I just want us to get back to how things were," Gregory said during the third session. "How things were was a lie," I told him. I didn't look at the therapist. I looked directly at my husband. "You wanted a house that ran like a clock, but you didn't want me to be the one who wounded it. You wanted me to be the ghost in the machine." Brandon shifted in his chair. He didn't look at me, but he didn't roll his eyes either. "I didn't realize you felt that way," Gregory muttered. "You didn't realize it because you didn't have to," I said. "You got the results. You got the clean house and the scheduled appointments and the peace and quiet. You didn't have to see the friction because I was the one absorbing all of it." Dr. Eris stepped in then, redirecting the conversation toward a set of household boundaries. We spent an hour discussing who was responsible for what, writing it down on a piece of paper that felt as formal as a construction contract. Brandon was tasked with his own laundry and his own medical appointments. Gregory was responsible for his own scheduling and the shared bills. I was responsible for my own life and the basic maintenance of the shared spaces. It wasn't a miracle. There were no tearful embraces or sudden declarations of love. We didn't leave the office feeling like a whole family. We left feeling like three people who had finally agreed on the rules of a ceasefire. As I drove home that evening, the sun dipping behind the peaks of the Wasatch, I thought about the Japanese maple I'd saved back in the summer. I remembered the feeling of the grit in the valve and the way the water had pooled in the mud. I had spent years trying to clear the debris out of my marriage, thinking that if I just worked harder, if I was just more efficient, the plants would survive. I realized now that you can't fix a leak if the other person is the one drilling the hole. I pulled into the duplex driveway and saw Brandon's car parked crookedly across the pavement. He'd left a bag of trash by the side door instead of taking it to the bin. A few months ago, I would have picked it up without a word, annoyed but compliant. I walked past the bag and went inside to make dinner. I didn't feel the need to bark an order, and I didn't feel the need to fix it. I just left the bag where it was, a small plastic monument to the new way we lived. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't peaceful, but for the first time, it was honest.